further suspense, we have an official debate happening. We have Deonteleologist, we have Azgerod. For this debate, Deonteleologist is taking the position that neither speaker-based nor speakers group-based moral relativism can make adequate sense of moral disagreement. Azgerod's taking the opposition. As always, when we based upon who concedes, we don't get a vocal concession from either participant. We'll put it to a voting poll in which you, the audience, can decide on who you think performed better overall in the debate. Light moderation, no time limit. Thank you both for debating. You can get started.
All right, so gonna put my cards on the table. A lot of my position has been informed by the work of a philosopher named David Wong, who's I believe a distinguished professor at Duke, and he's done a lot of work on moral relativism, disagreement, and naturalist approaches to human morality that sort of try to be as scientifically accommodating as possible. So I'm going to be reading a couple quotes from a chapter he wrote in, I believe it's the Blackwell Companion to Relativism from 2011. The paper is called Relativist Explanations of Interpersonal and Group Disagreement. So I'm going to start with a couple quotes. So first, Wong begins the paper by saying, "The most frequently traveled path to moral relativism starts from the existence of moral disagreement and runs through an argument to the best explanation. Part of the proposed explanation of moral disagreement is that human beings construct moralities." Another quote, "The advantage of construing moralities as social constructions is that it explains why moral disagreement seems very different from disagreements over the physical structure of the world. There are moral disagreements that do not seem to turn on disagreements over non-moral factual matters, such as the moral permissibility of abortion, or conflicts over the relative priority of conflicting and basic values, such as individual rights, autonomy, social utility, community, and the duties of special relationships with particular others. These disagreements do not seem to arise from lack of attention or faulty reasoning to the evidence at hand. The construal of moralities as social constructions is the favorite explanation of why at least some important moral disagreements are irresolvable in this way." So this line of reasoning, seeing moralities as social constructs, is often invoked by proponents, end quote by Wong, I'm just speaking now, is often invoked by proponents of a position that I'm going to call speakers group-based moral relativism. The thesis of speakers group-based moral relativism states that the truth value of a moral proposition P uttered by a speaker S is determined by P's accordance with the moral standards of S's society, culture, or moral community. So if S's moral community affirms P, then P is true. P is false if S's moral community rejects P. For example, in the US, we might say that American morality sees it as morally reprehensible to kill and eat dogs for food. In certain parts of Asia, this belief is not to be found in certain moral codes. So if I say that it's wrong to kill and eat dogs for food, then it would be true because I'm an American and I belong to the American moral community. But someone stating that in Vietnam, the proposition might be rendered false. But now I'm going to go to another quote from David Wong. "There is a challenge for this conception that is posed by the way that moral disagreement ranges not only over groups that could be said to be moral communities, the members of which substantially agree on the content of moral reasons and norms, but also within such groups. In other words, no group is such that moral agreement is perfect, and in light of the pervasiveness of moral disagreement, it is important to ask how it is that moral reasons and norms get socially established within a group, and for whom in that group they are established. Some relativists might hold, in light of the pervasiveness of disagreement even within groups that largely agree on morality, that the truth conditions for a moral judgment refer to the moral reasons and norms accepted by an individual speaker." So, end of Wong quote. So this view I will call speaker-based moral relativism. The thesis is the truth value of a moral proposition P uttered by a speaker S is determined by P's accordance with S's moral standards. I have those definitions. I'll just go ahead and put in the debate chat so that we can refer to them if need be. Okay. So again, speaker-based moral relativism, rather than the truth conditions being given by the speaker's culture or moral community, they're given by the speaker's moral standards themselves. Okay. Do you have this, Azgerod, do you have any questions about this so far, or should I get into my argument?
You go ahead.
Okay. Cool. All right. So with these positions on the table, I'll go ahead and jump into why I think neither of them can make adequate sense of moral disagreement. So, speakers' group-based moral relativism. For this view, there seem to be three ways that we can explain a disagreement, right? So, there can be three ways we can. So, one common way of explaining disagreement. It seems easy enough how we can explain disagreement between moral communities, right? We can say, well, look, these people in group 1 have different moral standards than the people in group 2. And so, I mean, there's still the problem of it not really seeming like genuine disagreement, because we have to relativize terms like permissible and impermissible to particular standards shared by one group but not shared by another group. But I'm not going to focus on that problem for speakers' group-based relativism. I'm going to focus on the problems that come with trying to explain disagreement between members of one moral community. So there are a couple ways that you could try to do this as a speaker's group-based relativist. You could say that the dispute is really over how the group standards ought to be interpreted. You could say that the dispute is over how the group standards ought to be applied or what follows from those standards. Or there could be a dispute about whether certain standards are consistent with one another. This is sort of a dispute about the internal coherence of the group standards. Someone can allege that there's inconsistency between principle 1 and principle 2 that a group holds. So all of these are ways that the speaker's group-based relativist can try to explain intra-group disagreement, where two members of the same group disagree. But there seem to be some kinds of moral disagreement that don't fit any of those. So the common way of that a speaker's group-based relativist would see these disagreements or see sort of morality in general, they would see morality in general as a kind of tacit or implicit agreement between members of the same group. So the idea would be that sort of I recognize that, you know, there's this sort of invisible social contract type of idea where as long as you don't steal from me, I won't steal from you, right? But someone in the group might reject the terms of the agreement, right? Might reject that actually it is immoral to steal, for instance, and yet still see themselves as having reasons to conform to the tacit agreement, right? So, I mean, sociopaths have no problem picking up what are the social norms, the moral norms of a given society, but they might see the only reason to obey these standards as being prudential self-interest. They might think, look, it's just in my own interest to not break these rules so that I don't have to face the consequences or something like that. So someone might reject the terms of agreement and yet still see themselves as having reasons to conform. Another instance might be that someone leaves their home moral community and goes and spends some time in another moral community, and uh, with enough time and talking to other people in this new moral community, that person comes to see some of their home group's norms as wrong. Um, it doesn't seem a requirement of this that the new views that say uh, eating dogs is wrong or something like that. It doesn't seem a requirement that embracing this new view must be based on the belief that the original group has misinterpreted, misapplied, or failed to resolve a contradiction within the original moral code. Next, even within a moral community, there can be moral disagreements about controversial or taboo subjects where the parties totally agree on how to interpret, how to apply uh, the moral values, and agree that there's no contradiction within the moral code itself, yet they still come to different conclusions on whether something is morally permissible or impermissible, or somebody ought to be punished or ought not to be punished for a certain action. Um, and finally, there are just two additional problems that are much bigger that I'm not going to go into too specifically, but you just have the problem of trying to delineate different moral communities clearly, right? Should when I'm talking about whether it's permissible for me to kill and eat dogs, should we see myself, should we see me as belonging to the moral community of Americans as or of Californians or of Southern Californians or of um, you know, uh, secular Jews in LA County, right? Like how exactly are we going to determine where the boundaries of the moral groups are? Relatedly, how are we going to determine what exactly uh, prevails in a given moral community? Is it just majority rule? If so, on controversial issues, we would seem to have the unintuitive conclusion that whether a moral proposition is true could change day by day based on the majority just slightly going over uh, back and forth between opposing sides. So these are some problems for speakers' group-based moral relativism, and a lot of these problems have led people instead to adopt speaker-based moral relativism. This is often referred to as subjectivism. Um, and this says that the truth value of a moral proposition is determined by the standards of the speaker who utters it. So the main problem that rises for speaker-based moral relativism is called, or I will call, the dilemma from indexicality. So speaker-based relativism, moral relativism, seems to require giving an indexical analysis of moral terms. And this gives rise to a dilemma. So when I say indexical, I mean, for instance, that when I say it's morally wrong to kill and eat dogs for food, what I'm really saying, or the term wrong, really means something like wrong according to me, right? It doesn't mean universally wrong. It doesn't even mean wrong for anyone within my culture. It just means wrong according to my standards. And uh, there's a dilemma that comes from this. So either ordinary competent language users know that moral discourse is indexical in this way, in which case there should be no such thing as moral disagreement. But we want to say there is moral disagreement. Um, so the other option is to say that uh, there really only appears to be moral disagreement because we fail to recognize that moral terms are by nature indexical. If we realize that terms like ought, permissible, obligatory, these moral terms really were indexicals, right? Uh, then we would realize that actually there's just no such thing as moral disagreement. And it's more like disagreement about what the best ice cream flavor is, right? But not disagreement among aesthetic realists who really believe that there is a best ice cream flavor, but among aesthetic anti-realist or subjectivists. And that really what the best ice cream flavor is exclusively determined by who's saying the statement X is the best ice cream flavor, and whether, as a matter of fact, they believe that X is the best ice cream flavor. So the problem for taking this route, saying that there merely appears to be moral disagreement because we fail to recognize that moral discourse is indexical, is to explain why we should believe this, right? Why should we believe that although ordinary competent language users can pretty much always tell when a statement is relying on indexicals or is not relying on indexicals, we can't do that when it comes to moral discourse. And to make it more clear, the problem can be posed like this. How does the speaker-based relativist explain the pretty much ordinary there's some evidence that this is universal with respect to at least some moral propositions. I can link to a paper arguing that if people are interested in seeing it. But the default assumption that if someone else's moral judgments are correct, that this has implications not only for them, but for me too, and for my family, my loved ones, and at least for people in our culture, if not for everyone across the world, right? When somebody tells me that they don't think veganism is morally obligatory, or more to the point, if someone tells me that they think veganism is morally impermissible, right? And if I think, they uttered a true proposition, then the ordinary response to that is, well, shit, if I'm vegan, then I'm violating a moral norm. And so the onus is on the speaker-based relativist to explain why it is that this feature of moral discourse is so widespread. And even when we try to embrace the speaker-based relativist view, and we try to allow that there is no such thing as moral disagreement in the strong sense, we still engage in moral arguments. We still try to change other people's mind about these things. So that's the basic presentation of why I think that neither of these can successfully explain moral disagreement. And I apologize for the long-winded nature of the opening statement, but that's my position.
So I just want to clarify one thing real quick, which is like, what do you consider to be to adequately make sense of moral disagreement? Like, what are the goalposts there? What would that mean to adequately make sense of moral disagreement?
So the view wouldn't itself have to explain moral disagreement. It wouldn't have to explain why it is that cultures disagree, but it would have to be it would have to be able to explain why either how do I exactly put it? It would have to this is just a sort of grossly intuitive way of putting it, but it would have to not fly in the face of several ordinary assumptions that are present in moral discourse and in moral disagreement. And if it wants to say that there is no such thing as moral disagreement, it should be able to accommodate the fact that we ordinarily think that there is such thing as moral disagreement.
So if I were to describe I'm gonna be going for the speaker-based moral relativism because I agree with you largely about speakers group-based moral relativism. Um, so if I were to give you a description of speaker-based moral relativism or an explanation of why this uh, is a like, so if a person holds the belief that the proposition of speaker-based moral relativism, if I can show that that kind of person can adequately understand and act in a way that people normally are able to act, then I've made adequate sense of moral
Um,
disagreement. Is that the idea or what?
I I don't think I would reject the idea that, there are people who genuinely believe speaker-based moral relativism is true and can still sort of play along in the moral discourse language game, as it were. Um, because clearly there are, right? You can point to philosophers who seriously defend this view. Uh, the question is, I think one way to put the objection is speaker-based moral relativism can't make sense of the fact that some people aren't relativists, right? Why is it that if our moral language really consists of these hidden indexicals, um, that when this point is pointed out to people, it's not convincing? Why is it that even when I, read, say, Jesse Prince's book where he argues for a form of speaker-based relativism, that I walk away completely unconvinced, and um, even when I know, like, what I consider to be the best arguments for it, uh, I still continue to believe that. Well, I guess that this is kind of a separate question as to why it is that some people, even presented with the best arguments, don't buy it. I think that's unfair to hold as a standard. I guess the way of putting the point would be something like, how does speakers speaker-based moral relativism make sense of the fact that in ordinary moral discourse, um, it seems to be presupposed that the view of moral language that it endorses is entirely false.
I mean, that's kind of like just a sociological question. Like, why do people think that like God is real? I don't think God's real. Why do people hold this belief? Why do so many people believe that morality is objective? Why do so many people believe that science is absolutely infallible? These are all beliefs that I don't agree with. And for me to explain why people hold them, it's kind of more of a psychological, sociological question. It doesn't seem that I need to answer those things in order to like it doesn't seem the purview of atheism to explain why people believe in God. I don't see how that's
No,
relevant
that's true.
to
That's
this
true.
belief.
Um, but okay, let's put it this way. Speaker-based relativism says, so I mean the dilemma is this, right? Either these are hidden indexicals, or these are indexicals that we know to be indexicals, right? So if these are hidden indexicals, then people should know that there's that they're sorry. If they're not hidden, then everyone should know that when we use moral language, um, people are making statements about their own views rather than statements about views that have implications for other people, right? If I say it's raining outside and you're on the other side of the world, and you know that I'm, halfway across the world from you, then you don't take what I said to apply it to you, right? You don't think that because I said it's raining, that it's raining where you are. And so either moral discourse should work like that, or moral discourse is, I think this is probably the more plausible one, these are hidden indexicals. But the question then is, how is it that indexicals can be hidden? Because there are no other examples of indexical terms where it's entirely unclear to the ordinary competent language user that the term being used is indexical with like just a little bit of clarification.
So I'm just going to do it from my perspective for a second. So if I say eating meat is wrong, then I would say that there is a hidden indexical, in the sense that the people who listen to me say that might not know that there's an indexical there, and I didn't explicitly state an indexical, right? But I personally do recognize that there's an indexical. So there is an indexical, right? When we're talking about like these linguistic kind of facts of the matter, whether or not there is an indexical or if there isn't, it's kind of it's about what the person's saying, right? It's about what the person's implying. So if I believe that morality is
Wait.
subjective,
Just to clarify, is it about what they're saying or is it about what they're implying, as in what they're intending to say or what they mean?
yeah, it's about what they're intending to communicate. So like
Okay.
if
Okay.
I believe that, so if I believe that morality is objective, then anytime I make a moral claim, there's a hidden indexical there. But if someone believes that morality is objective, then there isn't really an indexical there. They're making a claim about the universe. Now I can come in and impose an indexical and say, oh no, there's an indexical there, but that's not really true. Like they're stating it like it's a fact of the matter, like they're saying that, you know, the Earth revolves around the sun. It's not really, they're not saying it like, oh yeah, I think the Earth revolves around the sun. It's my opinion. They're stating it like it's a fact of the matter. So it's really up to what the speaker
what the speaker
thinks.
intends to convey. Okay.
Exactly.
So then my question would be, how is it that that the semantic content of the sentence can be um, different when, so say you utter eating meat is wrong, and you're a firm true believer of speaker-based moral relativism, so you acknowledge the hidden indexical, right? You know that it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm you say a utilitarian or something, an objectivist or a universalist or an absolutist, and I don't think that there's a hidden indexical there, and I think that what I'm stating is true for everyone, or every member of like the human moral community or something, then how is it that the sentence has different semantic content when I
So
say it and when you say it?
it depends on what we mean by semantic content or what we mean by meaning. The way that I usually view meaning is related to the intention, the intended content that that the speaker wants to communicate. But you could also view it as the meaning that is interpreted by those who are communicated to. So I would say it is different um, between when you say it and when I say it, in terms of, the meaning being the intent, and it's perhaps not different depending on the listener. Um, if we're talking about what meaning being what the person who's communicated to interprets it as.
Okay. So I I have I would like there's a lot in there that I disagree with, and I'm going to see if maybe it'll become relevant later on. But I want to just focus on the sentence here. The sentence, for instance, that eating meat is wrong, right? And so on your view, or on speaker-based moral relativism, the truth value of that is determined by the moral standards of the speaker, right? And so I'm confused as to how it could be true or false when you say it based on your moral standards. It seems to me that it would have to be true or false in virtue of the fact that there's an indexical there when you say it. But when I say it, there's no indexical there because I don't mean to imply any indexical thing. And so how is it that the truth value when I say it is determined by my own moral standards if there's no indexical there?
Right. So when I talk about like an indexical being there or not being there, dependent on the speaker's point of view, I'm referring to a purely linguistic kind of object, right? The indexical being just purely an artifact of the person's intent of what they want to communicate. But in terms of the truth of what they're saying, I would say, no, I just disagree with them. I think that any claim, any moral claim they make is only extendable to themselves, or it is only their opinion, and that any claim I make is only my opinion, right?
Just don't understand. So do you think that there's no relationship between the semantic content of the proposition and whether that proposition is true?
I just don't think the indexical is relevant.
So is the indexical um is not a constituent of the semantic content of the sentence or a component of
I
the
mean,
semantic
it it
content of
it
the
may
sentence.
be. I don't really know if I can make a claim like, oh yes, the entire semantic content is relevant or the entire semantic content is non-relevant. But what I can say is that the indexical doesn't seem to me to be relevant to the truth of the statement, um, but rather, or if it was, it would only be it would only be so for a person um, who believes that the indexical is there to begin with, right? But I would say that the rest of the content does matter with respect to, like, if we're saying that triangles have four sides, that might be true, whereas triangles having three sides is not true.
Wait,
Or sorry, the
triangles
other
have
way around. The
okay,
other way
okay.
around.
Okay, okay. So I mean, so you're a relativist about truth when it comes to moral issues, but if I were to say something like the earth is flat, and by that I meant to say that the earth is round, you wouldn't want to say that it was true because of how I meant it, right?
Well, I would say that um, you uttered like the what you intended to say was true, but what you actually said was not true.
Right. And here, speaker-based moral relativism is not about what someone intended to say, but it's about the proposition expressed by their utterance, right?
Okay, so I guess then there's never anything that's implicit wouldn't exist, right?
Anything that's
Like
implicit wouldn't
like
exist.
like if we're just talking about the utterance itself, then anything that isn't explicitly stated wouldn't be part of the utterance that's in question, right?
Um, I mean, can you give me an example? I'm having a hard time
Like if I say
tracking.
eating meat is wrong, then whether or not there's an indexical there, it's there definitely isn't, because the utterance is simply the verbal words that I'm saying and their kind of direct meaning. Anything that I didn't say would not be part of the utterance,
Well, so
including the
there
indexical.
could be you could have the view that there's a hidden indexical, right? And that seems to be the view that you embrace. But
Uh,
that there being a hidden indexical, what I'm trying to get at is that why should there be hidden indexicals at all? ordinary competent language users can tell when a statement is invoking an indexical or not invoking an indexical. But in moral discourse, that, according to speaker-based moral relativism, that seems to go out the window.
No, again, I think that whether or not someone's using an indexical is entirely based upon their intent. That's what I'm talking about. Like when whether or not someone is referring to their own subjective beliefs or whether or not they're referring to some objective statement about reality is entirely up to them, right? I can
So
impose upon what they're claiming to say that they're wrong, that there is no objective morality, but they're still lacking an indexical when they're talking about that.
it seems to me that this would lead to something totally absurd, right? So if I say, for instance, that if I say it's 2:41 p.m., right? Clearly that seems to be an indexical statement, but let's say by that I mean to say, as a matter of fact, for everyone everywhere, it's 2:41 p.m.
Yeah.
That clearly the sentence that I stated has an indexical in it, and according to your view,
This is a
it
very good
doesn't.
analogy. I'd say this is a very good analogy for making my point. So, like, if someone believes that their statement, it is 2:42 p.m. or whatever, is non-indexical and applies to everyone across the world and across all galaxies equally, then I would personally say that they're mistaken because my view of time is that it's relative to the time zone you're in. Now, they did not state it with an indexical. If I were to say it, I would state it with an indexical. But the indexical is not relevant to the truth of the matter. I would just say that they're wrong when they try to apply that statement. Like like when they say if they just said it without an indexical, that's a different statement than if they say it with an indexical. One may be true and the other may be false, right?
This is I've never heard I had no idea that this was the way you're going to try to defend this, and
That's
I mean,
okay.
I wonder whether other people think that this is plausible at all, but it seems to me that your view of like the philosophy of language is just like patently absurd. Like an indexical, for a sentence to have an indexical is something that we can determine based on looking at the sentence. Not always, but here's an example of one where we can, right? Um, what's in just like a simple example? I actually have to look up the definition of indexical because I'm wondering whether if I say something like, I'm 6 feet tall, whether I'm, has whether that sentence we would say has an indexical. Yeah, here, you, me, that one, there, next Tuesday. Okay. So these are examples of indexicals. So um, if I say, you're a really smart person, right? And so that clearly has an indexical in it. Now, if
Yeah,
I
if
say,
you're not making an objective claim, but it like some people would say that there's an objective way to measure intelligence, you might be making an objective claim, but sure.
okay, sorry, let's do this. Um, your name is identical to your name. Seems
Okay.
to me that that's a clear statement of a logical truth that
Mhm.
contains an indexical, contains two indexicals, technically. And whether I meant to say by that, pass me the peas, is entirely irrelevant to whether that sentence contains an indexical.
Okay. I'm confused as to the point you're making, but what I was saying was that like you can have an index like you were saying just to be clear, you were saying earlier that one of the problems with this idea of a hidden indexical was that it doesn't exist anywhere within human language. But the statement it is 2:41 p.m. is an example of a statement in colloquial use which does have a hidden indexical. Just to be clear, right?
But it's a hidden one wherein just the tiniest amount of reflection reveals the indexical,
Agree.
right? That's not the
Whether
case with speaker-based moral relativism.
Right. So, I mean, there are examples where people are aware of certain things, and other examples where people are not aware of the same of another object within the same class of things. Like sometimes people just aren't aware of stuff. I don't see how that's a problem.
But
Um,
I mean, yes, sometimes people aren't aware of stuff, but it is a feature of language on, I mean, I guess not your view, but like the common view among linguists and philosophers of language is that uh, competent, ordinary language users can pretty easily discover whether a sentence contains an indexical or doesn't, right? And not in a specific sense,
like
where indexical here does not mean whether the person means there to be an indexical, right? It's
so what I imagine you're saying is that you can determine it by inspection and not through like some kind of third party or exterior knowledge, right? Like you could look at the statement, it's 2:41 p.m. and infer from the grammatical structure that there's an indexical there. Is that what you're claiming?
Well, not from the grammatical structure. You would have to know things about the semantic content of the words, right?
Right.
Because if say it's 2:41 p.m., that's not the same. Although the grammatical structure would technically be the same as, uh, like it's the case that snow is snow or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, although the logical
So,
structure wouldn't be the same, the grammatical structure seems to be pretty much the same.
so what we seem to have said now is that whether or not there's an indexical um, observed by someone hearing a communication is dependent upon their knowledge of the subject matter in the content, right? So if or indeed and knowledge, I would argue, right, is dependent upon opinion. You may like or belief, right? So if we believe that time is relative to a time zone, then when we talk about these things, a hearer of the statement "it is 2:41 p.m." would of course infer an indexical. But if you don't believe that time is relative, well, then you would think that then they're just making a statement about time in general, right? And similarly, if we're making a statement, it is wrong to eat meat, if you believe that it's subjective, then you will believe that there's an indexical there, or you'll interpret there as being an indexical, even if that's not what the person speaking it intends, because the person saying that eating meat is wrong believes that it applies to everyone. It's just a matter of belief, whether or not people
It's
intend
not
there to
just a
be or
matter of belief.
interpret an indexical.
It's
What?
not just a matter of belief, because in all other cases with indexicals, all you need to know is the meanings of ordinary terms and basic familiarity with for
So,
the concept of time, just
but
how that works. Like you might be a little kid and think, "Oh, it's 2 o'clock here. It's 2 o'clock everywhere," but then just the most minimal instruction uh, of how time zones work will show you your error.
I guess I just don't get the point. Like, yeah, sure, people. Th- it's again, it's just dependent on belief. Like all you're arguing is that this belief is a very obvious one to hold, but it's clearly dependent upon belief because if someone did not believe that time was relative, then they would not be interpreting their. They would interpret there being an indexical there, or and if people
The
did not believe,
disanalogy is that there's a fact of a matter, right? When I say that it's 2:50 p.m. here, whether that's true in other time zones can be shown demonstrably to be false. And there's no analogy for that in the morality case.
but that's just your belief. Like when you say that it's wrong that well, like when you say that it's wrong that it's 2:41 over in Ohio or something, you're you're just like stating your belief about that. But I'm sure you'd agree that if a person did not believe the time was relative, then they would be, and then if they did say that, they would be referring to um, some objective universal time. And similarly,
No, I don't. I wouldn't agree.
you wouldn't agree. You would say like if I'm
I
sitting here
would.
and I think okay, like I'm saying okay, it's 241 across the entire universe, but I don't put in the total across the entire universe thing, but I believe it. You think that there's still an indexical there, even in terms of
Yes,
like
and you
my
failed to recognize the indexical.
I guess so, but like
But with the
when
most
but it's an
minimal instruction, your
inferred.
error will be revealed to you.
Well, if it's an error, but I don't think it's an error, right? Like, you know. But anyway, I
What do you
don't
mean it's
find
not an
this.
error? You think that it is 241 everywhere?
Yeah, hypothetically, if I'm this person, yeah. I'm not saying personally I do, but I'm saying in this hypothetical, you were saying hypothetically you would be given minimal instruction. I'm saying hypothetically it wouldn't really be convincing to me necessarily. But
I mean,
anyway,
fucking Christ, dude. Okay, like you like you can say that there would be such a person who when they call their uncle on the phone or something and their uncle tells them it's 3 hours later, they just don't believe them. And whenever they have to whenever they watch, say, a sporting event and it's going on the other side of the world, and they see that it's dark where they are, but it's bright outside where the sporting event is. That they just ignore it, and
yeah,
they
just like when people who believe in objective
no. So
morality
so here's here. So if
disagree
you
with
can make
people who
this
state opinions
analogy,
that
if
are
you
in
can make this
contradiction to
analogy
that objective
work,
morality.
if you can make this analogy work, then I'll concede. But you need to show me that how easy it is to disprove the notion that time zones are universal, is analogous to how easy it is to disprove that
No, I
morality
don't think
is
I
universal.
that may be the goalpost for you personally changing your mind, but I don't think that's necessary. I don't think that that's relevant to the question. The whole question to me is just about whether or not um, uh, it's
You can
just
make
about what the
sense of moral
person
disagreement. Yeah.
intends. Like
Well, that's
it's just
that's
about
your
yeah.
interpretation, I guess. But the question is whether speaker-based moral relativism can make sense of moral disagreement. And the question here is how it could possibly be the case that there are these hidden indexicals, uh, not hidden in the sense that the most basic amount of instruction can reveal the indexical to
Thing is,
to a competent language user.
you're just saying that this kind of thing does not exist in even if I grant you that this kind of like hidden indexical doesn't exist in other parts of the language, it just doesn't therefore imply that it's not that there aren't hidden indexicals with respect to morality.
Right. No, it doesn't entail that. But the problem, right, the onus is on the speaker-based moral relativist to give a convincing answer to the question, why should indexicals that are hidden and not easily exposable exist in this part of our language when they don't exist in any other part of our language?
No, I'm just claiming that that's what exists, and thereby I make sense of moral disagreement.
No, 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 no. Making sense of it requires you to explain why it is that we should think the language works this way in one pocket of our discourse when it doesn't work that way in any other part of ordinary discourse.
I don't think I have to like show why it's an exception. I'm just saying it's an exception. I believe that my view
Whoa, whoa,
allows me
whoa,
to
whoa,
make
wait.
sense of moral
So
disagreements. I'm
you're just
saying that
saying
there's a
it's
hidden
an exception.
indexical.
So when I say that speaker-based moral relativism cannot adequately make sense uh, of this feature of moral discourse, and I raise the dilemma that
Mhm.
shows what the problem is and how you have to embrace one side or the other, and how each side leads to certain counterintuitive conclusions that the speaker based moral relativist would thereby have to address. And your answer is, I believe that hidden indexicals exist. You don't tell a compelling story as to why we should believe that there are hidden indexicals in moral discourse, but not in any other part of our discourse. And that's the challenge I'm trying to raise. And it seems to me here your response is, I believe it.
I mean, like The idea is that when someone states something like eating meat is wrong, I think that let's go to something else. Like, um, can you imagine a statement that's like it is 2:41 p.m. but it's disputed? Like, it's just
Sure.
like if
Yeah,
if
sure.
if people had competing notions for time, for example, like if some people were saying, no, I mean time is just this thing that's like counted off in some faraway galaxy, and they tell us exactly what time it is through some like big information pipeline or something, and that's the objective time. And other people are like, well, no, it's just dependent on the sun, and it's just dependent on, and therefore it's dependent on where we are in the world. Like, we can imagine a circumstance where this would be the case. The only difference is that in our current society, we just don't happen to have disagreement about this fact, right? But it's it's clear that,
So
like, if it's a very plausible hypothetical, and in that circumstance, we would be making that kind of hidden indexical because it's just something we disagree about.
so I think this will be useful for the discussion. So I appreciate you bringing up this analogy. But
Mhm.
just to be clear, how or would this be different to, for instance, say you and I are walking down the street and I say, "Geez, it's fucking hot outside," right? And you say, "It's not hot. What are you talking about? The weather's perfect." Um, we're in the same, like, there are hidden indexicals there, but the indexicals are referring to contexts that we're both in, and we both understand the scope of the indexical. We don't we're it's clear to both of us, uh, say that we're not talking about whether it's hot in Minnesota, right? We're talking about whether it's hot in California or even just this city that we're in, right? Just whether
Sure.
it's hot in
So
LA.
I would
So is that
argue.
analogous to the one that you were talking about, or are you talking about one where the concept of time is not taken to be subjective in the way that heat is, right? But that there are still disagreements um, about what time it is, for instance.
Well, the analogy is that some people think it's objective and some people think it's subjective, right? Some people
Okay,
think that
so
it's objective because it comes from this little pipeline of information from the other galaxy. Some people think it's subjective because they are talking about the sun going up and down, right?
well, I think the people who are talking about the sun going up and down, um, I don't see how that would show that it's subjective. Do you just mean like in
Well, I mean,
relation to
like
their
relative to the time zone.
relative to the time zone? Okay. So here, just so I'm clear on the analogy, uh, there are some people who are saying what time it is objective and it's the same everywhere
Yeah,
because of this information that we get from the universe.
yeah.
And some people who say that what time it is subjective based on uh, what time zone you're in. So I don't understand why you would, if this is the analogy, it seems straightforward to me that this example supports something more like an error theory, um, at least for one of them, rather than a relativism, according to which the person who says that time is universal based on the universe, information about the universe, is uttering a true statement, and also the person who states that time is relative um, due to based
Hmm.
on or sorry determined by what time zone you're in is also uttering a true statement. Like, why would we want to say that both of those things are true?
Well, I think there's like it's pretty similar here. Like when, for example, if somebody takes the Bible to produce objectively true moral statements, and other people believe that it's just generated by your own individual, values and beliefs, the people who believe that it's subjective will say that the people who think it's objective is wrong, even though they see where they're getting their standard from. And the people who believe it's objective will say, well, no, you're wrong. You should be using this standard, right? And similarly with the time zones versus the objective universal information.
So
Uh,
are you not
conception.
only a moral relativist, but like a factual relativist?
Well, I'm just sort of. I don't know. Um,
Because if the time analogy is going to work, then I think you have to embrace factual relativism.
well, I'm just saying that they're talking about different things. They sound inconsistent, right? But they're just kind of talking about different things because they're saying this is true according to this standard, this is true according to that standard. But the trouble is that people claim that in fact the objective standard is the only one that's okay, and that the subjective ones are wrong, and vice versa.
So I'm confused. When you
Yeah.
say that that speaker-based moral relativism is correct, do you mean that it's correct according to you, or that it's correct?
I mean, it's correct according to me. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, is the statement "it's correct according to you" correct according to you, or just correct?
Correct according to me, and so far regressively ad infinitum.
So why should anyone believe any argument that you give?
Well, they should only believe the arguments that I give if the justifications that I provide for my claims are in accordance with their own justification processes and meet this, and my claims are shown
Wait,
to
why
meet the
should they
standards
do
that they
that?
have for truth.
Because the claim for whether they should believe your arguments based on those whether the arguments you give correspond to their justification processes is that sounds like a claim that's not just correct according to you, but correct. Because if it were correct according to you, why should they accept that?
Oh, it's correct according to me. I'm not like I'm not trying to force people to agree with me or anything. I don't think there's any like logical necessity for people to agree with me. I'm just stating my justifications and hoping that it matches their own standards.
I
That's
mean,
just my intent. Yeah.
okay, but you see the problem, right? I mean, if if you eventually one of it can't be the case that you are claiming that some view is correct, um, and that all that means is that you think it's correct. I mean, that's just not what it means to say that something is true or correct.
Well, I mean, I would make the same argument for truth. I guess like I don't know, truth slash falsity subjectivism that I am for moral relativism. I would say that there is an indexical when I make a truth claim, but there is not indexical when some person makes an objective truth claim or claims to have an objective truth claim.
So say it again.
Like
There is an
there,
indexical when someone means there to be an indexical and otherwise
yeah,
there isn't.
yeah, exactly. It's all about what they intend to convey, essentially.
But that claim itself is not a relative claim. You just made like a factual objective claim.
No, I mean,
Oh,
again,
but because
because
you mean there to be an indexical, there's an
yeah,
indexical.
yeah,
Okay, at this point, if you want to say that there is no objective truth, uh, and somehow that the statement that there is no objective truth is not a claim to objective truth, then I will say that your position is self-defeating, and
it's
I don't understand
not.
how anyone could believe it.
It's not.
Um,
Like when I'm trying to negate a proposition, I'm not saying it's objectively true that the proposition is false or anything. I'm just saying that I believe it to be false, and I'm going to present arguments in favor of it being false, so that if other people have similar thought processes to mine and similar standards for believing that something's false, then they might change their minds as well. Right?
okay,
There's
but
nothing.
that's it's sort of a pivot because you're making if, originally you made claims about what is true, and now you're making claims about what you believe. And even when you're
No,
making claims about what you believe, it's implicit in those claims that it is true that you believe these things.
So
So, I
just
mean,
to be clear, right? You're just saying that based on my philosophical framework, I can't win any debate because
no, it's
I'm
not
not
that you
making
can't win a
objective
debate.
statements. Like,
It's not that you can't win a debate, right? I mean, if people find your arguments convincing, then they might
yeah.
vote for you and you can win a debate. But whether you win the debate won't be true or false relative to my beliefs about whether you won the debate. You will either win the debate or not win the debate.
Okay.
And
I mean,
that is a
anyway,
matter of fact, not opinion.
but the thing is, this is just a fundamental disagreement we have about, objectivity versus subjectivity of truth. Like, we could talk about this for an hour and a half, but it's not going to resolve, and I don't think it remotely defeats my argument. It just reframes my argument with an indexical.
Right. I mean, certainly, if you don't believe that there is such a thing as objective truth, then I don't see how we can make any progress on this conversation. So,
Well,
I mean,
well, first of all, I mean, if I believe that even if I did believe in objective truth, I would very likely have different standards for the objective truth than you would, and so we wouldn't make any progress there either by the same
no, that
argument.
that
But
that's not necessarily. At least we could agree that there is an objective truth, and we could say, whether a statement is true or false, right? Whether that the truth of that statement is not contingent on whether someone believes it to be true.
this just doesn't matter. Like, whether or not I'm claiming that it's true to me, and I think it probably should be true to other people if they're willing to take my argument, or whether or not I'm claiming that it's objectively true is just besides the point. The point is, can you make a case that these types of moral relativism should not be adopted by the audience and by myself, right?
Well, I
And
didn't
I'm just,
say that they should not be adopted. It's an open question whether they should be adopted. I'm trying to point out in this debate a weakness
yeah,
of these
that's
two
that
versions of moral
specific,
relativism.
sorry, like that specific point about them, though, right? But
Right,
it's
that
just neither here nor there whether our disagreement about the objectivity of truth. It just doesn't really matter. That
well,
I would say is kind of a
you
tangent.
can say that. You can say that, but at which you know, then we're going to get down to things as to like whether, if I make a modus ponens argument and I say, look, this is a sound argument, you say, look, actually, I accept the premises and I accept the general inferential rule of modus ponens, but I don't believe the conclusion. And so I'm going to say that
Sure,
I don't want to accept this argument.
but
And if
and
you
you
can
would
do
have a
this all
point.
day long with your factual relativism, if we can agree on the rules of inference that distinguish strong and weak arguments or valid and invalid, sound and unsound arguments, then I think that
Yeah,
actually clearly does have a lot to do with whether we're going to make progress on this
yeah.
question.
If my moral subjectivism or my factual subjectivism belief was such that I was actually making that kind of trouble in this debate and making statements like, "Oh no, modus ponens doesn't make sense. I disagree with you on that basis," then I don't think we wouldn't really have a problem with respect to the debate because the entire audience does agree with modus ponens, presumably, and so they would just say, "Okay, I don't agree with Azgerod's arguments for this part of the debate." We can still proceed. They're just going to disagree with me. As it stands, I'm not making any kind of claim like that. I just am making the
That's
arguments
true.
that I think is reasonable, and hopefully they agree, and hopefully you agree.
That's interesting. So, I mean, I think I've pretty much made my argument, which is that, look, uh, the way that indexicals function in our language are such that they're either out in the open or that they are hidden, but can be easily exposed with a bit of reflection or given a bit of information um, about how a certain concept works or something like that. And according to speaker based moral relativism, there's an entirely different kind of hidden indexical. And the problem I pose to the speaker based moral relativist is look, this completely flies in the face of the way that we think about indexicals in linguistics and in the philosophy of language. And so it's on you to explain why we should believe that they function this way. And you can say, I don't believe that the onus is on me. I just assert that these hidden indexicals are hidden, and these are different from all the other kinds of indexicals in our language. And I don't think I need to provide a justification for that. Now, if that's your position, then that's your position, and I would trust that the audience would recognize that you're sort of dodging the argumentative burden that I'm placing on you, because we can all agree here that every other kind of indexical statement functions this way. It's sort of a mystery as to why we should think that moral indexicals posited by the speaker-based moral relativist function in this way that no other indexicals do. So go ahead and tell us a convincing story as to why we should believe that they function this way.
So I'm just gonna again state like the way in which, to me, the speaker-based moral relativism does make does make sense of this kind of thing, right? So what happens is that me and the person I'm disagreeing with over whether or not eating meat is wrong each have their own subjective beliefs about the subject matter. I believe that it is wrong. They believe that it is not wrong. I make the claim eating meat is wrong. When I do so, there is a hidden indexical that is referring to my own belief system, right? It's saying it's wrong to me. When the other person makes the claim eating meat is not wrong, they perhaps are referring to an objective morality, and they are not using an indexical there when they're speaking about it. And I would say I don't see an indexical there. However, I know that there's an indexical when I'm speaking because I know that I'm only referring to myself. Therefore, we can have statements like this where there's an indexical that is observed by some and not by others when they hear the same phrase. I would say that this adequately makes sense of the disagreement. I think it's wrong. I personally believe that eating meat is incorrect. I believe that their statement is false, and they believe that my statement is false and that theirs is correct. That is what a disagreement looks like, and I think I've adequately made sense of it.
Okay, so two things. First is, yes, I understand that that's how the theory is supposed to work, right? You've explained how the theory works, but you still haven't given us a convincing story as to why we should think that there are these hidden indexicals in moral discourse that don't pop up in any other part of our discourse. The second point to push back on is that if there's no indexical in the statement of the person who says eating meat is not wrong, and they mean it to refer to some sort of universal objective morality, then it's totally unclear to me why we should say that whether that proposition is true is determined by their own moral standards, because they're not referring to their own moral standards. On your view, they're referring to objective morality.
Yeah, so they're referring to objective morality. That happens to be the subject matter of their statement. Um, and whether or not it's true is dependent upon their own standards for determining whether or not a moral statement is true. According to my beliefs, it is false. According to their beliefs, it is true. I don't see what the
Wait,
problem was.
so it seems to me that there was a slight tweak of the
Hmm.
view, at least as represented above. Because the view as
Okay.
represented above is that the truth value of a moral proposition is determined by the moral standards of the um, the speaker. So if the
Yeah.
speaker who believes in objective morality says that eating meat is not wrong, and they think eating meat is
Um,
not wrong, then uh, it's true. But as you just
mhm.
said, it's not their own standards. It's actually their way of determining whether something is true.
Well, no, I just mean like when we talk about moral standards, we're talking about whether or not, like how to determine whether or not a moral statement is true or false, basically, right? Like
I think,
if to reach the statement that like eating meat is wrong, you're just using some set of criteria to determine that that statement is true. I mean,
well, I don't think so, because I mean,
okay.
so someone could say, well, in some sense, yes, because the criteria here, as I'm intending to characterize speaker-based moral relativism, the criteria is just whether the speaker believes in the truth of the moral proposition.
Sure.
The way that you seem to be talking about it, though, is that there is some sort of strategy or algorithm or like way of concluding from principles to a particular verdict on a certain case, right?
Mhm.
So, like, I don't think whether someone is a utilitarian matters as to whether they think that a certain proposition, in assessing the truth value from the perspective of the speaker-based moral relativist, because the speaker-based moral relativist doesn't care whether you're a utilitarian or a deontologist. They care whether you believe in the proposition. So,
Yeah, sure.
And of course,
okay. So it's not in terms
yeah, that's
of,
essentially what I mean, right?
okay, good.
I just mean like, yeah. If they, like if they believe that it's, if they believe that it's true, they believe that it's true. I don't believe that it's true. That's our disagreement.
right. And it's true. It's true as long as they believe it's true.
Yeah.
And so the problem that I'm trying to point out here is that
Mhm.
for speaker-based moral relativism, it seems you have to rely on there being hidden indexicals in statements that can make them true or false. Because when they say, I believe that eating meat is, or sorry, when they say eating meat is not wrong, there's a hidden indexical in the
Oh,
not wrong that refers to their own beliefs. But you're saying that there needn't be any such indexical, and we can still believe in speaker-based moral relativism.
I'm not sure if I understand the point you're making. It's possible that I don't, but
Okay, so I can try to make it clearer.
sure.
So, for speaker-based moral relativism to work, it seems to me that there must be hidden indexicals in all moral statements, so that when I say eating meat is wrong, uh, in the wrong is a hidden indexical, and we can translate it into being a an exposed indexical by saying eating meat is wrong according to my beliefs or my standards, or I believe eating meat is wrong.
Just to be clear, like when you say an indexical, are you referring to the kind of indexical I'm talking about, which is more like what they're intending to communicate?
So that's what I'm trying to point out is that when I say it, and suppose I'm a universalist or an objectivist, when I say it, I don't intend to communicate any indexical. But if
Yeah,
I don't intend to communicate any indexical, then on your view, there is no indexical there.
yeah.
And I don't see how we can get from there being no indexical there
Hmm.
to affirming speaker-based moral relativism. Because it seems to me that
Right.
the way to get from uh, a proposition uttered by a speaker
Hmm.
to a relativist way of affirming the truth value or determining the truth value of that statement uttered by that speaker needs to rely on there being a hidden indexical in that statement. But on your view, there is no such hidden indexical when, as long as I don't mean there to be one.
Right. So I guess I don't understand why you think that there needs to be a hidden indexical required for me to view their statement as being relative to their own criteria.
You don't understand why that needs to be there.
Yeah.
Well, because otherwise, what's the difference between someone who says, um, someone who says, for instance, eating meat is wrong, where they know that they are right. So what's the difference between the relativist who says eating meat is wrong and the universalist who says eating meat is wrong? And how can we get uh,
Well, the
to
difference is that one has a hidden indexical and the other doesn't. But
right?
I'm
So
not. But I don't see
why
why
do
it's a
we affirm
problem
the
for some of
truth
them
value?
not to have those hidden indexicals.
How do we get from this person says that uh, eating meat is objectively wrong
Yeah.
to that statement is true,
Right.
but true for them
Right.
without
Right.
the indexical.
Right. So they make the claim like eating meat is wrong, and that contradicts other statements that are eating meat is okay or is good or something like that. And the question is, how can these both be true and not be contradictory if there's no like indexical there? Is that the idea?
That sounds pretty much right.
Hmm. So I guess the distinction that I'd make is that when someone speaks from an objective standpoint, they're not stating an indexical. When they make the statement, they're making a statement about reality, about some objective truth. And from a relative standpoint, I would just say that I think
I mean, wouldn't you just deny that their claim? You would say,
like,
no, it's not
yeah,
true
maybe.
that there's a universal morality?
I think so.
But if
Yeah,
that's the
I think
case, then
yeah.
I don't see why we want to say that it's true when the
But
objectivist says
right,
eating
right,
meat
sorry,
is
sorry, sorry.
wrong as long as they
I
believe
keep
it. Why don't we
conflating.
endorse error theory instead?
I keep conflating two belief systems because I'm very close to the speaker-based moral relativism, but I'm not exactly it, right? Because I would say it is false for them to say that it's to state their claims can be false, but it's true for them, but it's false for me or whatever. Whereas we're saying that it's just true by virtue of it being according to their own criteria. So like I would say that what their statement is true, right? It is true that that eating meat is okay, and my statement is also true that eating meat is not okay, and there don't need to be any hidden indexicals here. We can both be objectivists, and there's no hidden indexicals, so the claims are directly contradictory. But when people make claims, when people make propositions, when people posit any kind of claim, I believe uh, that yeah, no. I actually, as straight up, I concede because it's true. You can't. Yeah, they contradict each other. Yeah, no, that's true.
A factual relativist and just say that whether there's a contradiction doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna go there. No, good debate though.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah.
Oh, you.
Thank you. I mean, not thank you because like that sounds kind of patronizing, but like I appreciate the intellectual integrity and the concession.
Yeah, it took me a while to figure out that point. I had a hinting of it earlier, but I didn't know that that's what you were talking about. But now that I realize, like, right. I was the whole debate, I was like operating tacitly under my own belief system, which is not quite speaker-based moral relativism. And under that belief system, you can just say, no, it's like it's true for me, but it's false for you. But that's not what speaker-based moral relativism is claiming. And you're right, there is the problem with the indexicals under that belief system.
Right. So it's close to that. It's not exactly like true for me, true for you. It's like
Yeah,
true
in
given that it
general.
is uttered by this person, but like
Yeah,
false given that it is uttered that by this person.
exactly. And then in order for that not to be contradictory, you'd have to have some differences between the statements implicitly there, and that would have to be
Right.
those
The
indexicals.
indexicals.
Yeah, but I agree. Those indexicals don't exist some of the time. Yeah.